Let's find out what my next guest thinks about it. He's going to be with us for half an hour. Always a pleasure to welcome Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Hi, Brendan.
Hey, how's it going?
Very, very good. Well, listen, we've just run this exclusive story, which was footage in a film made by a guy who managed to get a job in an asylum seeker hotel. And it occurred to me that while people all over the country protest about the asylum seeker hotels in their midst, quite rightly, worried about the kind of people that are in there, we don't have a clue what goes on in them, because they bring down these, they black out the windows, they put steel barriers all around them, and they put security blockades outside with guards that don't let anyone in. This guy managed to get a job. He lived there for 3 months. I'll just show you one little bit of what used to be the lovely 4-star 16th century Copthorne Hotel in the leafy countryside of Sussex, not far from Gatwick Airport. Nice place with koi carp ponds, a golf course, manicured gardens. But anyway, this is what it's become.
There is site manager washing himself in preparation for prayer. The vast majority of Crown Lodge staff and the security team are all Muslim. There is a mosque that has been made in one of the previous boardrooms in the hotel, and service users and staff all pray together in the mosque. There is. I did find it rather odd that there wasn't separate prayer facilities for staff and service users. I understand the advantages of having people that speak Farsi and Arabic and can have that cultural rapport, like between service users and staff, but I did find that perhaps there's not quite the same level of professional dynamics that you would expect between staff and service users in a migration management facility.
Yeah, Brendan, service users is the word they used for asylum seekers, the residents of these hotels. His film, this guy, his name's Aston Knight, his film reveals that there's a 24/7 delivery service of food, massive amounts of food, toiletries, necessities coming all the time. Police cars there almost always, ambulances, social workers turning up to deal with the various mental health issues that unfold. He said that before he got there, 10 women had babies on the premises. There's grass, marijuana and grass crushing machines in all the rooms. It's extraordinary what we do for these people. 3 meals a day, plus they get a delivery of an afternoon snack to their room every afternoon, and so on and so forth. So they live in in rooms with 4-poster beds, en suite and everything. Here's the police. So in other words, what people I don't think realise is what is entailed by us paying for these migrant hotels, these asylum seeker hotels. We are providing absolutely everything for these people free of charge. Their kids are picked up every morning and taken to school by free taxi, and so on and so forth. It is bizarre the amount we are giving these people.
It's ludicrous. It truly is bizarre. It's hard to believe, you and I and others have been criticizing this regime of letting migrants come in and giving them bed and board and all the rest of it. But to see what actually happens, to see these very fine living conditions that we're paying for them to have, kudos to Talk for publishing this film, because people do need to see what's going on here. And isn't it amazing, Kevin, that we can't protect our borders. We can't police our borders, apparently. But when it comes to policing these hotels and protecting them from outsiders and putting barriers around them to protect them from protesters and filmmakers, then the police are very good at their jobs. So they can't protect the nation, but they can protect the men who come here illegally from prying eyes. I think it's absurd. And it makes perfect sense to me that millions of people up and down the country are absolutely furious that while they are struggling to make ends meet, their hard-earned wages, their taxes are being used to give bed and board to men who came here illegally, often from regressive cultures, and who are often committing crimes while they are here. 21st century Britain is putting up in hotels criminals who come to our country and commit crimes. It is an extraordinary state of affairs.
And not a word on this escalating crisis from our Prime Minister. As I said to Isabel Oakeshott just now, there was this sort of high hopes at some certain point yesterday where he suddenly announced, because of course it was very unsatisfactory that while the nation was falling apart at the seams with all these angry demonstrations, these very justified demonstrations outside asylum seeker hotels, our cabinet and our politicians were all on holiday, very nice. So we're not getting any service from them. And you'd think, well, would the Prime Minister say anything? No, he didn't say a damn thing about them. But then suddenly a glimmer of light because he announced there would be. He was calling the cabinet back for an emergency cabinet meeting. You think, oh, good, at last he's going to take a look at what's happening around the country. Why has he called them back? To talk about Gaza.
You know, that really sums up Keir Starmer, doesn't it? You know, we're about to hit the first-year anniversary of the Southport massacre and the riots that followed it. And we're having an emergency meeting on an intractable, difficult conflict more than 3,000 miles away. That's Starmer summed up. You know, they would never have an emergency cabinet meeting in the summer over anything as trifling as the problems facing actual British people. You know, the fact that there is this working class revolt against these migrant hotels. People are really angry. The fact that people are demanding answers, the fact that people are wondering why our borders have become so porous and so lax that hundreds of men are crossing into our nation every single day. That's an emergency. That's what should be demanding the attention of cabinet ministers over the summer holidays. But instead, they're talking about a foreign conflict over which Britain has very little influence at all. You know, it sums up Keir Starmer. He's Mr. Human Rights, isn't he? He famously said that he prefers to be at Davos with the kind of gold-collared superclass of the World Economic Forum. He prefers that to being in Westminster. He prefers mingling with globalist bigwigs to tackling the problems faced by ordinary working-class Brits. He prefers pontificating on Gaza to actually fixing the problems here in Britain. I would like to ask him what he's going to do about this country, where, if he has forgotten, he was elected Prime Minister a year ago. This is the country he should be talking about.
Yes, and although he hasn't mentioned the escalating crisis over the asylum seeker hotels, by the way, I believe more than 600 migrants came across the channel yesterday, and still they keep coming and coming. So that's about 5 or 6 days in a row. We forget the invasion continues apace. So he hasn't said anything, but he's clearly worried that there will be a repeat of the disturbances of last year. And in a haunting reminder, I think, of last summer's tyrannical crackdown, two-tier Keir has created the exciting new National Internet Intelligence Investigations Unit. That's a squad of police snoopers trawling through social media posts to check on anti-migrant sentiments. That is, of course, really sinister, something out of Stasi Germany or Stalin's Russia or something like that, today's North Korea. But also, it shows that he just doesn't understand. What he did last year, he thinks worked. It didn't work. I mean, OK, he banged up a lot of people. 385 people, I think, went to jail. 12 of them for posting hurty words on social media. Yes, of course, that stopped the rioting in the short term, but it didn't stop the reasons, because he wouldn't even listen to the reasons. When he was asked about two-tier justice, two-tier policing, he turned away and said that's not a thing and just stormed out. So here he is again, worried about a repeat of last summer's disturbances, and quite clearly the way he's going to deal with it, he's going to turn into Pol Pot or something like that, like he did last summer, and come down on us like a ton of bricks, calling us all far-right thugs and throwing us all in jail. When is this guy going to learn?
You know, this is the most aloof government I can remember in this country. I'm old enough to remember, you know, the 1980s, when the government was mostly made up of posh old white men who went to Eton, probably never met a working class person in their lives until they got into politics. But even those people were far more in touch with British public sentiment than Keir Starmer is and the rest of his cabinet. They're in their ivory towers, looking down their noses at us plebs, spying on us to make sure we aren't saying anything untoward on the internet, controlling what we speak, what we say, and by extension, what we think about the migrant crisis, and essentially just saying, listen, we'll tell you what you're allowed to say on this issue. We will punish you if you say things that we think are unacceptable. And, you know, of course, there's the whole online safety bill, which is censoring and clamping down on perfectly legitimate speech, like people saying that there are only two sexes, or even a speech about the grooming gang scandal is now coming up with a warning on the internet. This is like something out of 1984, where you have Big Brother, Starmer's government, looking over our shoulders constantly, making sure that we aren't saying things that they think is unacceptable. So not only do they have no solutions to the migrant crisis and the other crises afflicting this country, they don't even want us to have the liberty to talk about these problems and to come up with our own solutions. It is a tyrannical government to try and cover up the fact that it's also a useless government.
Yes, indeed. And you talk about the online safety bill. Well, this was apparently used to prevent people around the country from looking at the disturbances outside asylum seeker hotels. They're all over the country. I think there were 3 on the south coast. There was Epping, of course. There was one big one in Ashfield, which is Lee Anderson's constituency, where a local asylum seeker has been charged with rape. That tends to be the trigger when a local asylum seeker migrant is either charged or convicted of rape. Not unsurprisingly, the local community doesn't take kindly to it. Anyway, you were unable over the weekend to access any of this, what should be perfectly legal footage. You got the message if you, for example, wanted to see what was happening outside the Britannia Hotel in Leeds on Friday. You got the message, due to local laws, by the way, I think that means British laws, due to local laws, we are temporarily restricting access to this content until X, as in Twitter, estimates your age. X can't do this because it does not have an age verification process. So that message got reduced to access to this footage is being restricted. And the Grok chat box facility said that the Leeds film was restricted under the Online Safety Act due to violent conduct. So this is the way they're dealing with it. They're trying to keep it secret, throwing a veil of secrecy over actual events. That way madness lies. Governmental madness lies that way, and yet that is the route Starmer is taking.
You know who else does this? China. The Chinese communist regime restricts what people can read on the internet about the Tiananmen Square protests. Now, of course, they were far larger protests and they had far more deadly consequences than the protests we're currently experiencing, which are more peaceful and, I think, good and positive, that people are protesting about these issues. But the exact same dynamic pertains in both situations. You have the Chinese communists, that infamously tyrannical regime, restricting what people can see on the internet about certain forms of protest that took place in 1989. Now we have our own government restricting what we can see on the internet about protests that took place last week. It's an extraordinary state of affairs. And, you know, the online safety bill was presented to us as an attempt to protect children on the internet, but actually what it's done is make children of all of us. Yes. It infantilizes everyone in the country. It has this default position that if you're on the internet, you're a child and you need the government to cover your eyes and cover your ears and make sure you don't see anything offensive. It really sums up just how paternalistic censorship can be, where the instinct is always for the officialdom to come in and protect us poor little saps from seeing anything that might offend us. That's not how freedom works. We absolutely should have the right to read what we want to read and look at what we want to look at, and in particular, to know that there are disturbances in this country because of the mishandling of this affair by government.